Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was recruited into the Midnight Suns to battle the supernatural. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain over Muzitifo was a relentless, weeping thing. It fell not in cleansing sheets, but in a cold, greasy drizzle that clung to everything it touched, making the neon signs of the city bleed into slick, distorted rivers on the asphalt. It was a miserable night for a miserable hunt, and Izuku Midoriya was perfectly suited for the occasion. He stood perched on the edge of a waterlogged rooftop, a ragged silhouette against the bruised purple sky. The figure he cut was no longer the bright, hopeful Deku of UA High. This was something else, something worn down to its essential, unbreakable core. His costume, once a vibrant symbol, was now a patchwork of field repairs, stained with grime and something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The metal of his mask felt like a cage against his skin, and the iconic cowl, tattered and grim, cast his face in permanent shadow. Only his eyes, a searing, determined green, burned with an intensity that defied the exhaustion etched into every line of his young face. He was a ghost haunting his own city, a self-imposed exile running on fumes, stale protein bars, and the terrible, crushing weight of responsibility. One for all thrummed beneath his skin, a constant, low-level hum of immense power, a legacy of 8 souls whispering warnings and encouragement into the back of his mind. It was a comforting presence, but also a constant reminder of the target painted on his back. A reminder of why he had to stay away. Shigaraki. All for One. The Paranormal Liberation Front. The names were a litany of his failures, a prayer of guilt he recited in the quiet, lonely hours between battles. He saw Bakugo's pierced torso, the life draining from Sir Nightie's eyes, the dust of countless lives scattered by Shigaraki's decay. He had run from his friends, from his teachers, from his mother, all to keep them safe. He was the prize, the final piece in All for One's monstrous game, and so he had made himself the loneliest player on the board. Tonight's hunt was a thin lead. A whisper passed from All Might through a scrambled burner phone. A low-level villain, a quirk trafficker with rumored ties to one of All for One's lieutenants, was supposedly making a deal in this forgotten, industrial sector of the city. It was a long shot, but long shots were all Deku had left. A flicker of movement in the alley below. Deku's senses, honed by weeks of constant vigilance, snapped into focus. He dropped from the rooftop without a sound, his descent cushioned by a wisp of float. He landed in a perfect crouch behind an overflowing dumpster, the stench of rotting garbage and rain a familiar perfume. The alley was a narrow canyon of brick and rusted fire escapes. He peered around the edge, his mind already cycling through possibilities. Quirk analysis. Capture strategy. Minimize collateral damage. Detain for questioning. The mantra was automatic, a product of years of training. But what he saw wasn't a villain deal. It was something stranger. 5 figures stood in a tight circle in the center of the alley, their faces hidden by the deep hoods of cheap, dark robes. They weren't exchanging briefcases or illicit support items. Before them, drawn on the cracked concrete in what looked like chalk and salt, was a complex, interlocking series of symbols he didn't recognize. They weren't Japanese, or English, or any language he had ever seen. They pulsed with a faint, sickly violet light. A low, rhythmic chanting filled the air, a guttural and discordant hum that grated on his nerves. It wasn't a language. It was a series of sounds that felt fundamentally wrong, as if the air itself were being twisted into unnatural shapes. In the center of the circle was a small, crudely made cage containing a whimpering stray cat. Deku's brow furrowed. A cult? Some kind of fringe group? Is this their quirk? A group activation? His analytical mind raced, trying to fit the scene into a familiar framework. Nothing fit. The energy in the air wasn't like a quirk. It was cold, ancient, and felt hungry. One of the robed figures, a tall man with a voice that scraped like rusted metal, raised a ceremonial dagger. The vessel is prepared. The conduit is drawn. By the blood of the innocent, we summon thee. Grant us the power you promised, O devourer of echoes. Deku's blood ran cold. Blood of the innocent? They were going to kill the cat. He didn't hesitate. He was already moving. Stop! he yelled, his voice rough from disuse. He burst from behind the dumpster, a green specter of righteous fury. Fa Jean coiled in his legs, and One for All surged to a controlled 30%. He didn't want to hurt them. He just needed to stop them. The cultists flinched, their chant breaking. Their heads snapped towards him, and under their hoods, he saw not the hardened eyes of villains, but the wide, terrified eyes of fanatics. They were scared, and they were desperate. "A hero!" one of them shrieked. "He'll ruin everything!" another cried. "Hurry! Complete the ritual!" The leader ignored their panic. His eyes, burning with a feverish glow, locked onto Deku. And then he smiled, a hideous, knowing expression. "The Devourer is wise," he rasped. "It sent us a greater sacrifice." Suddenly, the ritual circle flared. The violet light exploded outwards, but it wasn't aimed at the cat. It was aimed at him. The air crackled. The symbols on the ground shifted, reconfiguring themselves with impossible speed. The cold, hungry energy in the alley became a ravenous, targeted force. It wasn't just pulling at the air around him. It was pulling at One for All. Deku felt a profound, invasive pressure against his very soul. It was as if 1,000 icy hooks had sunk into the core of his quirk, trying to drag it out of him. The vestiges screamed in his mind, a chorus of alarm and pain. "Danger!" Nana Shimura's voice was a sharp cry. "It's not a quirk, Ninth. It's something else." Daigoro Banjo's warning was laced with a panic Deku had never heard from him before. The leader of the cultists laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Yes. A beacon of power. Far more than we could have hoped for. Take it. Take him." The ritual circle began to buckle. The ground didn't just glow. It began to liquefy into a vortex of swirling shadow and hellish, violet flame. The air tore open with a sound like grinding continents, revealing not another place, but a chaotic non-space filled with shrieking phantoms and impossible geometry. The cultists, who had been so triumphant a moment before, now screamed in pure terror. The summoning was out of their control. The vortex they had opened was no longer a doorway. It was a maw, and it was preparing to devour everything. The gravitational pull was immense, yanking at loose debris, at the dumpster, at the cultists themselves. One of them, a small woman, lost her footing and began to slide towards the swirling abyss. Deku's heroic instinct overrode his own peril. The pressure on his soul was agonizing, but the sight of people in danger, even these people, was a call he could not ignore. "No!" he grunted, digging his iron-soled boots into the concrete. Danger sense screamed 1,000 warnings at once, a psychic siren that threatened to overwhelm him. He ignored it. Black Whip erupted from his arms, not as weapons, but as lifelines. The dark tendrils shot out, wrapping around the waists of each of the 5 cultists, anchoring them against the monstrous pull. "I have you!" he yelled, the strain making his muscles scream. He was holding 5 people back from the brink of oblivion, all while the vortex itself was trying to tear his quirk from his body. But his act of heroism was a fatal mistake. By actively using One for All, he had made himself an even brighter beacon. The vortex, which had been a chaotic force, now had a singular focus. It latched onto the energy of Black Whip, onto the raw power of Deku himself. The pull intensified tenfold. Deku felt his boots crack the concrete beneath him. The icy hooks in his soul tightened their grip. He was the anchor, and the anchor was being dragged into the sea. He looked at the horrified faces of the cultists he was saving. Their expressions of terror were the last thing he saw of his world. With a final, deafening roar of tearing reality, the vortex consumed him. The world dissolved into a cacophony of light, sound, and unbearable pressure. He felt as though every atom of his being was being stretched across an infinite distance, and squeezed through a pinhole at the same time. The voices of the vestiges were drowned out by a cosmic scream, then silence. And a sudden, brutal impact. Deku slammed onto hard, uneven stone, the air driven from his lungs in a painful whoosh. For a moment, he just lay there, gasping, every inch of his body screaming in protest. The rain was still falling, but it felt different. Colder. He pushed himself up, his head swimming. The alley was gone. The cultists were gone. He was in a narrow, cobbled street, flanked by old, elegant brownstone buildings with intricate wrought iron fences. The architecture was completely alien, a style he'd only seen in pre-Quark-era foreign films. The air smelled of wet stone, exhaust fumes, and something else, something coppery and sweet. The language on the street signs was English. Bleecker Street. Where am I? He thought, his mind struggling to catch up. A villain's teleportation quirk? Did they get away? Did I save them? A choked gasp from nearby cut through his confusion. He looked up. 20 feet away, a man in a business suit was pressed against a brick wall. Standing over him was a figure that defied logic. It was a man, pale and gaunt, with eyes that glowed with a faint, predatory red. His face was contorted into a feral snarl, revealing elongated canines. He was dressed in modern, if slightly tattered, clothing. A transformation quirk? Animalistic features? Deku's analytical mind tried to categorize the threat, but it was the action, not the appearance, that froze him. The creature had its head bent to the businessman's neck. There was a sickening, wet, tearing sound. The businessman gargled, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to steal the very air from the alley. Blood, dark and thick in the dim light, sprayed across the wall. Deku's horror was absolute. This wasn't a robbery. It was a slaughter. Get away from him! The roar was pure, unadulterated instinct. One for all surged, green lightning crackling around him. He didn't think. He acted. He launched himself forward, a green blur of motion. Delaware smash, air force. He flicked his fingers, sending a compressed cannonball of air at the attacker. It wasn't a full-power attack, just enough to create distance, to knock the villain away from the civilian. The blast struck the creature square in the chest. It was thrown back, not with the force Deku expected, but with a guttural roar of anger rather than pain. It slammed into the opposite wall, leaving a spiderweb of cracks in the brick, but it was already pushing itself up, its red eyes locking on to Deku. A new toy, the creature hissed, its voice a low, raspy sound. It licked the blood from its lips. And you smell delicious. So much life. Deku ignored the chilling words and rushed to the victim. He knelt, his gloved fingers searching for a pulse. It was there, but it was faint, thready. The man was bleeding out from 2 deep, precise puncture wounds in his neck. Pressure points. Stop the bleeding. Call for help. His training kicked in, but as he applied pressure, his eyes met the creature's, and for the first time, he felt the primal thrum of danger sense flare in a way it never had before. This wasn't the calculated malice of All for One or the chaotic rage of Shigaraki. This was the simple, straightforward threat of a predator staring at its prey. What kind of quirk is that? Deku demanded, his voice low and dangerous. He stood up, positioning himself between the monster and the bleeding man. The creature laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Quirk? I have no need for such mortal parlor tricks. It lunged, its speed unnatural. It didn't bound or run, it flowed across the ground, a shadow given lethal form. Deku reacted instantly. Black whip! Dark tendrils of energy erupted from his back and arms, lashing out to ensnare the creature. They wrapped around its limbs and torso, thick and strong, designed to hold villains who could bench press a city bus. He pulled tight, expecting the creature to be restrained. Instead, a horrific sizzling sound filled the air. Smoke rose from where Black Whip touched the creature's skin, as if it were being burned by acid. The creature roared, a sound of genuine pain this time, and with a surge of impossible strength, it tore the tendrils apart. The severed ends of Black Whip dissolved into harmless motes of energy. Deku stared, his mind reeling. It burned through Black Whip? No one can do that. Not even Shigaraki. The creature was on him now. Claws, long and sharp as razors, swiped at his face. Deku ducked, the claws scraping against his metal mask with a shriek of tortured metal. He countered with a kick aimed at the creature's midsection, channeling 15% through his shoot style. The blow connected with a sickening crunch. It should have been enough to shatter ribs and send a normal person flying. The creature stumbled back a single step, a flicker of surprise in its glowing eyes. Then it grinned, revealing blood-stained fangs. Strong, it rasped. Very strong. It wasn't human. No human could take a blow like that and still be standing, let alone smiling. Whatever this thing was, the normal rules of engagement didn't apply. Deku's confusion was rapidly being replaced by a cold dread. He was in an unknown place, facing an unknown enemy whose abilities defied all logic. He couldn't hold back. He couldn't risk a non-lethal approach if it meant the man behind him would die. He shifted his stance, coiling power for a more decisive blow. Manchester smash. 35%. Aim for the head. Incapacitate. Now, he was about to launch himself forward when a blur of motion cut through the rain between them. It was a man. Dressed in black from head to toe, black tactical armor, a long black leather trench coat, and dark sunglasses despite the night. In one hand he held a sword, its silver blade impossibly sharp. In the other, a three-barreled weapon that looked like a silver shotgun. There was no preamble. No warning. The newcomer moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and terrifyingly efficient. Thwip. A silver stake, fired from a wrist-mounted launcher Deku hadn't even seen, buried itself in the creature's chest. The creature froze, its eyes wide with shock and recognition. It let out a choked, gurgling sound and looked down at the stake protruding from its heart. It wasn't enough to kill it. It staggered, clawing at the wood. The man in black didn't slow down. He closed the distance in 2 long strides. The silver sword came up in a fluid, precise arc. The blade whistled through the air. Deku watched, frozen in a state of horrified fascination, as the sword sliced clean through the creature's neck. There was a wet, final sound, and the creature's head tumbled to the ground. For a horrifying second, its body stood there, headless, before it erupted into a cloud of gray, foul-smelling ash that was quickly scattered by the wind and the rain. The head on the ground disintegrated a moment later. Silence descended on the alley, broken only by the patter of rain and the faint, labored breathing of the victim. Deku stared at the spot where the creature had been, then at the man in black who now stood calmly, wiping his blade on his coat. His mind, the brilliant, analytical tool that could deconstruct any quirk in seconds, came up with nothing. It was just empty. You killed him, Deku whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The man turned his head slowly. The dark glasses seemed to bore right through him. His face was a stoic mask of hard lines and grim determination. It wasn't a him, the man said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that held no room for argument. It was a vampire. And it was about to drain you dry after it finished with its appetizer. A vampire? Deku repeated the word. It felt ridiculous. Vampires were from old stories, from pre-quirk horror movies. They weren't real. They couldn't be. Look, kid, the man said, his tone sharp and impatient as he reloaded his stake launcher. I don't know what circus you crawled out of with that ridiculous outfit, but you're in the deep end now. You got a lot of power, I'll give you that. But your entrance was sloppy, and your hesitation almost got you killed. He sniffed the air. And you reek of something, not from around here. Ozone and something else. Something clean. It's making my teeth ache. Deku's mind finally began to reboot. He pushed past the shock and locked onto the one irrefutable fact of the situation. He was a person. He was talking. Maybe his quirk made him like that, but you didn't even try to subdue him. Heroes don't kill. The declaration, so fundamental to his being, hung in the air between them. The man in black actually let out a short, humorless laugh. Hero? You think this is a hero's work? This is pest control. That thing wasn't a person. It was a blood-sucking parasite. A virus in shoe leather. The moment it took a life, it stopped being a who and became a what. And my job is to end what's. The cold, brutal pragmatism of the statement was like a physical blow. This man, this killer, spoke of taking a life with the same detachment one would speak of swatting a fly. It was a complete and total inversion of everything Deku had ever fought for. There's always another way, Deku insisted, his fists clenching. Green lightning began to arc around him again, a manifestation of his agitation. You could have captured it. We could have found a cure, a way to reverse it. There's no cure for a sword through the neck, the man interrupted, not unkindly, but with the weary patience of someone explaining a simple truth to a child. You're new to this. I get it. You see a monster, you think you can save the man inside. But sometimes, kid, there is no man inside. There's only the monster. He took a step closer, and for the first time, Deku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. This man was dangerous. Not just skilled, but dangerous on a fundamental level. He carried an aura of death with him like a shroud. Now I'm gonna ask you one more time. What are you? Some kind of new mutate? Atlantean? That power doesn't feel like anything I've seen on this rock. The tension stretched taut between them. There were two opposing forces, two incompatible ideologies, poised on the brink of violence in a dark, wet alley in a world Deku didn't understand. He was a hero who saved everyone. This man was a hunter who judged and executed. Deku prepared to fight. He didn't want to, but he couldn't let this man, this killer, just walk away. Justice had to mean something. Before either of them could move, a third presence made itself known. It started with a flutter of red. A piece of fabric, a brilliant, deep crimson, whipped through the air and wrapped itself gently but firmly around Deku's chest and arms, pinning them to his sides. It wasn't aggressive. The pressure was just enough to restrain him completely. He struggled for a second, but the fabric was impossibly strong, molding to his form like a living thing. He looked down. It was a cloak. A magnificent red cloak with a high collar, and it seemed to be moving on its own. A new voice, calm, cultured, and carrying an echo of immense power, cut through the night. Eric. Try not to scare our guest. Both Deku and the man in black, Eric, looked towards the mouth of the alley. A man was emerging from a shimmering, golden portal that crackled with sparks of light. He was tall and distinguished, with streaks of gray at his temples and a neatly trimmed goatee. He wore a fine blue tunic over dark pants, and around his neck was a golden amulet shaped like an intricate eye. The eye seemed to watch everything, all at once. The crimson cloak detached from Deku and floated gracefully back to settle on the newcomer's shoulders. The man's gaze was piercing, ancient, and deeply weary. He looked at the dissolving ashes of the vampire, at the bleeding man on the ground, and finally, at Deku. His expression was one of grim assessment. Eric, the man called Blade, relaxed his stance slightly, though he didn't sheath his sword. Strange, he grunted in acknowledgement. He just appeared out of nowhere, lit up the whole block like a Christmas tree. The leeches were flocking to him. The man, Strange, nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on Deku. I am not surprised. A power like his, it must seem like a feast to them. He took a few steps closer, and with a lazy wave of his hand, a glowing orange rune appeared over the victim's wounds. The bleeding slowed, then stopped completely. The man's breathing evened out. Strange then turned his full attention to Deku. The intensity of his gaze was a physical weight. Deku felt as though the man was peering directly into his soul, reading the history of One for All, the legacy of the vestiges, the weight of his guilt, all in a single, silent moment. Izuku Midoriya, Strange said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. It wasn't a question. You are a very, very long way from home. Deku's breath hitched. How do you know my name? There are few power sources in any reality that burn as brightly, or as purely, as One for All, Strange explained, his expression unreadable. When a new sun suddenly appears in a dark sky, it is not difficult to notice. He gestured back at Blade. My associate can be abrasive. But his assessment is correct. You are in a world far more dangerous than the one you know, and your light attracts its darkest creatures. The golden portal behind him remained open, a swirling window into what looked like a grand, ornate study filled with books and artifacts. Strange eyes met Deku's, and for the first time, Deku saw a flicker of something beyond weariness in them. It was a sliver of desperate hope. My name is Dr. Stephen Strange, he said. And I have brought you here for a reason. He looked from Deku's confused, defiant face to Blade's stoic, blood-stained one. He's the solution, Strange said, his voice dropping, taking on a tone of grave importance that silenced the rain itself. To a very big problem. The world swam back into focus with the scent of old paper, ozone, and something like cinnamon and cooling metal. Izuku Midoriya's first conscious thought was that he was lying on something impossibly soft. It was a stark contrast to the hard, rain-slicked cobblestone he remembered, and an even starker contrast to the weeks of sleeping in abandoned warehouses and on cold rooftops. His body, a knot of exhaustion and constant, low-grade pain, felt a measure of relief so profound it was almost alarming. He forced his heavy eyelids open. He wasn't in an alley. He was in a large, circular room, lying on a plush velvet couch. Above him, the ceiling was a dome of intricate woodwork, and the walls were lined with towering shelves crammed with books of every conceivable size and age. The air hummed with a quiet, palpable energy, a feeling not unlike the thrum of One for All, but older, vaster, and infinitely more complex. His gaze drifted to the room's centerpiece, a magnificent, multi-paned circular window, its design a complex seal of 4 twisting pathways. Through it, he saw not the dark, rainy New York night, but a sky of swirling, alien nebulae in shades of emerald and magenta. He stared, mesmerized, as a creature like a crystalline whale drifted lazily past. "The window of the worlds," a calm voice said. "It looks out upon a great many places. I find it helps with perspective." Deku sat up with a jolt, his muscles protesting. Dr. Strange stood by the window, his back to him, the red cloak of levitation settled on his shoulders like a sleeping predator. He held a steaming mug in one hand and didn't turn as he spoke. "You have been unconscious for several hours. The transit between realities, especially one as violent as yours, takes a toll on the physical form. I took the liberty of repairing the worst of your costume. The scorch marks were particularly stubborn." Deku looked down. His suit was cleaner than it had been in months. The rips were neatly mended, the grime was gone, and the metal plates of his mask, which had been scraped by the vampire's claws, were smooth and unmarred. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name, gratitude mixed with a deep, unsettling confusion. "Where am I?" Deku asked, his voice hoarse. "What is this place?" "You are in the Sanctum Sanctorum," Strange replied, finally turning. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, held the weight of centuries. "My home, and a nexus for all magical energies on this planet. A fortress against threats your world has the luxury of believing are mere fiction." Deku's mind, a finely honed machine for analysis and problem-solving, immediately started to spin. Magic? A nexus? Is he saying magic is real? Is it a type of universal quirk? A manipulation of energy based on principles we haven't discovered? The man, Blade, called that creature a vampire. The vortex, it wasn't a teleportation quirk. It was a summoning, my friends, Deku said, the words tumbling out, laced with a familiar urgency. My world. All for one. Shigaraki, they're still out there. I have to get back. People are in danger because of me. I can't be here. He swung his legs off the couch, his body tensing, ready to find a way out, to fight if he had to. I understand your urgency, Izuku Midoriya, Strange said, his tone placating but firm. And I would not have brought you here if the circumstances were anything less than dire. But you must understand. The gateway that brought you here was a chaotic, one-way anomaly. A scream in the dark that we happened to hear. There is no simple path home for you. The words hit Deku like a physical blow. No way home. The thought was a cold stone dropping into the pit of his stomach. All his sacrifice, his isolation, his pain, had it been for nothing? Was he to be trapped here while his world burned? Then you have to send me back. Deku insisted, standing up, his fists clenching. You opened a portal in that alley. You can do it again. What I opened was a simple spatial displacement. A doorway from one street to another, Strange corrected patiently. Crossing the dimensional barrier is another matter entirely. It requires immense power and a precise understanding of cosmic coordinates. Your arrival tore a wound in the fabric of reality. To send you back would be like trying to reverse a lightning strike. It is not, at present, possible. Deku felt the floor drop out from under him. The fight drained from his posture, replaced by a dawning, hollow despair. He looked at the alien sky through the window, and for the first time since he'd left UA, he felt truly, completely alone. Strange's expression softened with a flicker of empathy. I did not bring you here to punish you, child. I brought you here because we need your help, and if we fail, the fate of your world may become irrelevant. He gestured to a large, oaken table in the center of the room. With a flick of his wrist, A swirling constellation of golden energy appeared above it, coalescing into a three-dimensional map of the Earth. Dark, pulsating blotches, like pools of oil, were spreading across its surface. There are forces older than mankind, Strange began, his voice taking on the somber tone of a historian reciting a declaration of war. Beings of immense power who view our reality as nothing more than fertile ground to be conquered and consumed. We are currently facing one of the most ancient and most terrible, Lilith, the mother of demons. The name seemed to make the very air in the room grow colder. Millennia ago, she was sealed away in a dimension of her own making, a realm of perpetual torment. But the barriers between worlds are weakening. Her influence seeps through the cracks, poisoning our world, preparing it for her return. These dark spots, he said, pointing at the map, are where her children, the Liline, have manifested. They are tearing at the seams of our reality, preparing to open a gate large enough for their mother to pass through. Deku stared at the map, his strategic mind taking over despite his emotional turmoil. You're fighting a war. A secret war, Strange confirmed. One fought in the shadows for the soul of this planet. My duty as the Sorcerer Supreme is to defend this realm. But Lilith's power is primordial. It preys on life, on hope, on faith. It corrupts everything it touches. My magic can fight it, but it is like using a scalpel to hold back a tsunami. He finally looked directly at Deku, and the intensity in his eyes was absolute. Which is why I brought you here. I needed a different kind of weapon. Me? Deku asked, confused. I'm not. I just punch things. A faint smile touched Strange's lips. You do far more than that. One for all is not simply a quirk, as your world understands it. It is a legacy. A confluence of heroic will, passed down through generations. It is the collected hope, sacrifice, and defiance of 8 noble souls, all condensed into a single, living beacon. He began to circle the table, his cloak drifting behind him. To us, to the forces of magic and mysticism, your power is something unique. It is not light forged from magic or divine prayer. It is the light of humanity itself, pure and unyielding. Against a creature like Lilith, who feeds on despair and corruption, a power source like yours, it is anathema. A cleansing fire, a song of hope in a world going silent. Deku felt a shiver run down his spine. The vestiges in his mind, who had been silent since his arrival, seemed to stir, a low murmur of agreement. He was beginning to understand. But it is also a danger, Strange added, his voice turning grim. Such a pure beacon does not go unnoticed in the dark. To Lilith and her children, you are not just a threat. You are a feast, a prize beyond all reckoning. If she were to corrupt you, to twist one for all to her own purposes, she would be unstoppable. The weight of it all settled on Deku's shoulders, a familiar, crushing burden. Another world, another apocalyptic threat, and once again, he was at the center of it all. So, he said, his voice quiet, you brought me here to fight your war, to be your weapon, with no way for me to get home. I brought you here to give both our worlds a fighting chance, Strange corrected softly. Help me stop Lilith, and I swear on my title as Sorcerer Supreme, I will devote every resource I have to finding a way to return you to your home. But we must have a world to return you to. The offer hung in the air. It wasn't a choice. Not really. Deku was a hero. He couldn't stand by and watch another world fall, even if it wasn't his own. The alternative was to sit here, useless, while 2 realities teetered on the brink. He squared his jaw, the familiar fire of determination chasing away the shadows of despair. Okay, he said, his voice firm. What do I have to do? Strange gave a small, relieved nod. First, you should meet the rest of the welcoming committee. He led Deku out of the study and into a vast, cathedral-like library. Bookshelves soared into the shadows, and artifacts from 1,000 forgotten cultures rested on pedestals. 3 figures were waiting for them. The first was Blade, the vampire hunter from the alley. He was leaning against a bookshelf, meticulously cleaning his silver sword with an oiled cloth, his movements precise and economical. He didn't look up as they entered, but Deku could feel his dismissive presence like a drop in temperature. The second was a woman who seemed to be Blade's polar opposite. She was perched on the edge of a large desk, casually swinging her legs. She had fiery red hair tied back in a practical ponytail and was dressed in rugged, sensible monster hunting gear, cargo pants, sturdy boots, and a leather jacket. A pair of ornate, silver-barreled pistols were holstered at her hips. She was currently polishing the lens on her rifle that looked powerful enough to stop a tank. She looked up as they approached, a wry, appraising smirk on her lips. The third figure was separate from the others, half hidden in the shadows of a far corner. He was a man with a haunted, weathered face, dressed in worn denim and scuffed leather. He was staring intently at the flickering flame of a candle, and the air around him felt heavy with torment and the scent of brimstone. "This is Eric, whom you've met," Strange said, gesturing to Blade. "He is our foremost expert on the undead." Blade grunted, not bothering to look up. "He's a kid, Strange. He's gonna get himself killed." He held his own against a fledgling, which is more than most could say, Strange countered smoothly. The red-haired woman hopped off the desk, wiping her hands on a rag. She sauntered over to Deku, her walk a confident, easy stride. She was shorter than him, but carried herself with an air of absolute competence. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, sized him up from the tips of his red sneakers to the top of his unruly green hair. "So this is the big green firework, is he?" she said, her voice a pleasant alto with a crisp British accent. "He's a bit earnest-looking, isn't he? Thought you'd be bigger." She stuck out a hand. "Elsa Bloodstone. Professional monster hunter, archaeologist, and general purveyor of things that make other things go boom." "It's a pleasure." Deku, taken aback by her directness, shook her hand. Her grip was firm and calloused. "Izuka Midoriya. It's nice to meet you." "Midoriya," she mused, tapping a finger on her chin. "Bit of a mouthful." "I'm calling you Broccoli Boy. On account of the hair." She grinned, a flash of white in her tanned face. "Don't look so offended. It's better than what Blade's probably calling you in his head." Blade finally looked up, his sunglasses reflecting Deku's flustered expression. "Liability," he said flatly, and went back to cleaning his sword. Deku's cheeks flushed. Before he could respond, Strange directed his attention to the man in the corner. "And that," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "is Johnny Blaze." As if summoned by his name, Johnny looked up. His eyes were the most haunted things Deku had ever seen. They were deep pools of regret and pain, and they didn't seem to be looking at Deku, but through him, at something behind him. A strange, uncomfortable pressure built in Deku's mind, and he felt the vestiges of one for all stir uneasily. Johnny's gaze was unfocused, his head tilted as if listening to a distant radio. "So many," he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You've got a whole choir of ghosts in you, kid. A whole chain gang rattling around in your soul." Deku froze. No one had ever been able to sense the vestiges before. Not even All For One, the man who could steal any quirk, had ever commented on them as distinct entities. Johnny took a shuffling step forward, his eyes finally locking with Deku's. "You better have a firm grip on that leash," he warned, his voice a dead serious rumble. "A power like that, built on dead men's souls, it's a heavy burden. Be careful they don't consume you before the demons do." The warning was so strange, so specific, that it left Deku speechless. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear of the man himself, but with the terrifying truth his words implied. He wasn't just a wielder of One for All. He was its warden. This, then, was the team. A cold-blooded killer, a witty gun for hire, and a man who seemed to be actively haunted by his own power. Deku looked from one to the next, his hero-worshipping heart searching for something, anything, to admire. All he found was a group of weary, cynical soldiers. Are you all heroes?" he asked, the question genuine and deeply important to him. The question was met with a beat of silence, and then Elsa let out a short, sharp laugh. "God, no," she said, sounding genuinely amused. "Don't lump us in with the cape and tights crowd. They save people. We clean up messes. Messy, bloody, often tentacled messes. There's a difference. Heroes have rules," Blade added, his voice dripping with disdain. "Codes. They talk about second chances. We don't have that luxury. Our enemy doesn't understand mercy. It only understands the stake, the bullet, and the flame." Deku's idealism, the very core of his being, bristled at their words. But you can't just kill. Every life is precious. There has to be a line. A way to save them, not just destroy them. There's your problem right there, Blade said, pointing his sword at Deku. You keep saying them. You're still thinking of these things as people. They're not. They're infections. You don't reason with the plague, kid. You eradicate it. The ideological chasm between them was vast and seemingly uncrossable. To Deku, a hero's primary duty was to save. To them, it seemed their duty was to destroy. He looked at them, these strange, broken people who fought in the dark, and for all their power, he couldn't see the shining light of heroism he had spent his life chasing. He saw killers. Instead of arguing, instead of letting his frustration boil over, Deku did what he always did when faced with the unknown and overwhelming. He began to think. His gaze drifted from Blade's sword to Elsa's guns to the way Strange's cloak seemed to twitch with its own volition. His muttering started, a low, subconscious stream of analysis. So it's not a quirk, it's magic. But magic has to have rules, a system. Is it an external energy source that he manipulates through somatic and verbal components? Or is it an internal energy, like a quirk factor, that responds to specific mental discipline? The vampire. Blade called it undead. A biological reanimation? A parasitic infection? It turned to dust, which defies conservation of mass, so it must be sustained by an external, non-physical energy source that was severed upon its death. And Mr. Blaze, he can perceive metaphysical entities. Is that a passive psychic ability, or is he connected to the same plane of existence as the vestiges? Are the vestiges themselves a form of ghosts? His power feels hot, like fire, but it's cold at the same time, a paradox of energy. His voice trailed off as he became aware of the dead silence that had fallen over the room. All three of them, four, including Strange, were staring at him. Blade looked profoundly annoyed. Elsa looked somewhere between fascinated and concerned. Johnny just looked, knowing. It was Strange who broke the silence, a glint of academic curiosity in his eyes. Your mind is remarkably agile, Mr. Midoriya. You grasp the fundamental questions of metaphysics faster than any neophyte I have ever encountered. He's just mumbling, Blade grumbled. It's creepy. No, it's brilliant, Elsa countered, leaning forward with interest. He's breaking it down. Treating it like a science. Most people just scream and run away. He's trying to write a textbook on it in his head. She grinned at Deku. You're a weird one, broccoli boy. I think I'm starting to like you. Deku felt his face heat up again, embarrassed at his habit. Sorry, he stammered. I do that when I'm trying to understand things. It helps me think. Do not apologize for your intellect, Strange said firmly. It may be your greatest weapon here. We have fighters. We have killers. We have scholars. But we do not have anyone with your unique, analytical perspective. Perhaps you can see a pattern that we, in our familiarity with this war, have missed. The validation was a small comfort, a single point of light in his sea of confusion. Maybe he did have a place here. Not as a weapon, but as a hero. As Deku. Before the conversation could continue, a deep, resonant tolling echoed through the sanctum. It wasn't a bell, but a sound that seemed to vibrate in the bones, a chorus of ghostly, disembodied voices singing a single, urgent note. The ambient energy in the room spiked. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. The casual cynicism vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged focus. Blade sheathed his sword with a clean, final shing. Elsa drew her twin pistols, checking the chambers with practiced efficiency. Johnny Blaze straightened up, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by a dangerous, smoldering glow. Even the cloak of levitation on Strange's shoulders seemed to tense, its corners sharpening. They went from a dysfunctional group of cynics to a unit of seasoned warriors in the span of a single heartbeat. On the table, the magical map of the world pulsed. A single point of light in New York City was flashing a brilliant, angry red. Incursion, Blade stated, his voice flat. Midtown. St. Patrick's Cathedral. Lilith's children have a flair for the dramatic, don't they? Elsa quipped, her voice tight but devoid of fear. Defiling a house of faith. It's dreadfully cliché. They're not just being dramatic, Strange said, his eyes narrowed on the flashing light. A place of such concentrated faith is a powerful locus of psychic and spiritual energy. If they can corrupt it, they can use it as an amplifier. A beachhead. He turned, his gaze falling upon Deku. The time for theory, for talk, for debate, was over. The war had come to their doorstep. Deku stood frozen for a second, the tolling bell echoing the frantic beating of his own heart. He looked at the faces of the people around him, hardened, prepared, and utterly resigned to the violence to come. He was out of his depth, out of his world, and about to walk into a battle against literal demons, and yet, a familiar surge of adrenaline, of purpose, coursed through him. A cathedral full of monsters. A city in danger. It didn't matter what world he was on. The mission was always the same. Strange gave him a final, appraising look. There will be no time for hesitation. No room for your half-measures. What you are about to face is not human. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be saved. He raised a hand, and another swirling, golden portal tore open the air in the library, revealing a view of a rain-lashed Gothic cathedral, its spires clawing at the night sky. The distant sound of screams filtered through. Strange sighs met Deku's, holding a challenge, a warning, and an order, all in one. Class is in session, Mr. Midoriya. Stepping through Dr. Strange's portal was like diving headfirst into ice water. The warm, scholarly silence of the sanctum was violently ripped away, replaced by a cacophony of chaos and a blast of frigid, rain-soaked air. Izuku Midoriya stumbled forward, his boots landing on the slick, hallowed stone of a plaza. Before him loomed the magnificent, twin-spired facade of St. Patrick's Cathedral, a Gothic titan of faith clawing at the tempestuous New York sky. But the sanctity of the place was being grotesquely violated. The grand oak doors had been torn from their hinges, splintered like driftwood. An unholy, sickly green light pulsed from within, casting the intricate stonework in monstrous shadows. The air, thick with the smell of rain and wet concrete, was tainted with something else. The coppery tang of blood and a charnel house stench of sulfur and rot. Screams, sharp and terrified, echoed from inside, punctuated by guttural, bestial snarls that were a blasphemy in this sacred space. Wards are up, Strange announced, his voice a calm island in the storm. He swept a hand through the air, and a barely visible dome of golden energy shimmered into existence around them, deflecting a spray of what looked like black, viscous acid that splattered from the cathedral entrance. They will keep the civilians out, and the lesser demons contained. But once we are inside, we are on our own. The team moved with a predatory grace that spoke of countless such nights. Blade drew his silver katana, its edge seeming to drink the dim light, and a wicked-looking submachine gun loaded with silver-tipped rounds. Elsa produced her twin pistols, the polished metal gleaming, her eyes scanning the area with the cool detachment of a seasoned hunter. Johnny Blaze remained a step behind, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, but his haunted eyes were beginning to smolder with an internal, hellish light. They were a unit. A well-oiled machine of death and destruction. And then there was Deku. He stood there for a half-second too long, his mind reeling. The sheer wrongness of the scene, the defilement of a place meant for peace and sanctuary, struck a discordant note in his soul. This wasn't a villain attack on a shopping mall. This felt like a fundamental violation of the natural order. Strange turned to him, his expression devoid of its earlier scholarly patience. It was the grim, resolute face of a commander on the front lines. "Listen to me, Izuku Midoriya, and listen well," he said, his voice low and absolute. "There is one rule in this war, and it is the only one that will keep you and this team alive." He locked eyes with Deku, ensuring he had his complete, undivided attention. "These things inside are the Liling. They are not human. They do not have quirks. They are fragments of a hell dimension given physical form. You cannot reason with them. You cannot knock them unconscious. You cannot intimidate them. You cannot save them." Each staccato sentence was a hammer blow against the core tenets of Deku's heroism. "There is no man inside the monster this time," Strange finished, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There is only the monster. You can only destroy them. Do you understand?" Deku swallowed, the lump in his throat feeling like a stone. He wanted to argue. He wanted to scream that there was always another way, that every life had value, that to kill was to surrender to the very darkness they were fighting. But the look in strange size, a look of profound, ancient weariness, told him that this was a truth forged in blood and failure, and it was not up for debate. He gave a short, jerky nod. I understand. Good, Blade grunted without looking at him. Try not to get in the way. And with that they moved. Blade and Elsa went in first, a whirlwind of silver and gunpowder. They flowed through the shattered doorway like wraiths, their movements a blur of deadly efficiency. The first two demons, skittering, insected creatures with too many joints and razor-sharp mandibles, were dispatched before they could even scream. Blade's sword decapitated one in a single, fluid motion, while Elsa put two perfectly placed silver rounds through the glowing eyes of the other. Both creatures dissolved into piles of gray ash. Strange followed, his hands weaving intricate patterns in the air, golden runes flaring to life. He wasn't an attacker, but a controller. With a gesture, he flung a wave of energy that slammed a charging, bull-like demon into a stone pillar, binding it there with shimmering golden ropes. Deku hesitated for a split second, then forced himself to follow, one for all crackling around him at a low, controlled 10%. He burst into the cathedral's nave, and the full horror of the scene hit him with the force of a physical blow. The pews were overturned and shattered. The magnificent stained glass windows, depicting scenes of saints and angels, were cracked and broken, the holy figures appearing to weep in the strobing green light. A handful of terrified civilians were huddled behind the stone altar at the far end of the sanctuary, their sobs lost in the demonic cacophony. And the demons were everywhere. They crawled on the vaulted ceilings, their claws scraping divots from the hallowed stone. They swarmed over the remnants of the pews, their forms a chaotic menagerie of nightmare fuel. Some were small and fast like the ones outside, others were hulking brutes, and a few floated in the air like bloated, spectral jellyfish with stinging tendrils. Their common feature was a pair of glowing, malevolent green eyes, all fixed on the terrified humans cowering at the altar. Deku's hero instincts screamed to life, overriding the shock. Protect the civilians. Draw the enemy's attention. Incapacitate and contain. He saw one of the smaller, skittering Liline break away from the main group, scuttling with unnatural speed towards a young woman who had been separated from the others, frozen in terror behind a broken pillar. I've got this one! Deku yelled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He saw Elsa glance his way, a flicker of concern in her eyes. But she was busy fending off two larger demons, her pistols barking a steady rhythm of death. Deku activated Fa Gene, the stored kinetic energy launching him across the nave. He closed the 50-foot distance in the blink of an eye, landing between the demon and the civilian. The creature hissed, its multifaceted eyes locking onto him, and lunged. Non-lethal takedown, his brain supplied automatically. He couldn't use a smash, it was too destructive. Capture was the answer. Black Whip! Tendrils of pure, dark energy erupted from his arms, lashing out with perfect precision. They wrapped around the demon's spindly limbs and torso, ensnaring it completely. Deku pulled tight, the familiar strain of containing a powerful opponent a reassuring sensation. He had it. He could hold it here until, a horrifying, sizzling sound filled the air, accompanied by a plume of acrid, green smoke. An intense, searing pain shot up Deku's arms, a feedback loop through the tendrils of Black Whip. He looked down in shock. Where his quirk made contact with the demon's chitinous hide, its dark green blood was boiling to the surface, acting as a powerful corrosive. His tendrils were melting, dissolving under the acidic assault. The demon let out a triumphant shriek, and, with a violent thrash, tore itself free from the dissolving remnants of Black Whip. Before Deku could react to the failure of his most reliable capture tool, it lunged again, its claws aimed at his face. He twisted away, but not before one of its talons scraped across his chest plate, leaving a deep gouge in the metal. The sheer speed and aggression of the thing were staggering. It wasn't fighting like a cornered villain. It was fighting like a starving wolf. He saw an opening and pivoted, channeling power into his legs. Shoot style, St. Louis smash. He swung his leg in a wide, powerful arc, aiming a kick at the creature's head. He held back, using only enough force to knock it out, not to crush its skull. His boot connected with a solid crack. The demon was thrown sideways, tumbling through the air before slamming into a stone column. It lay still for a moment. Okay, Deku thought, panting. It's down. Now to secure it. But as he took a step forward, the demon stirred. It pushed itself up, shaking its head as if trying to clear a mild concussion. A low growl rumbled in its chest. His attack, which would have put a formidable human villain in a coma, had barely dazed it. The young woman behind him screamed, and Deku whirled around. His focus on his own fight had drawn him away from his primary objective. Another demon, a larger, more brutish creature with the thick hide of a rhinoceros, was lumbering towards Elsa Bloodstone. She was reloading, her movements efficient but desperate as she fended off another creature with a combat knife. She wouldn't be ready in time. Deku didn't hesitate. Elsa, look out! He launched himself towards her, aiming another kick at the brutish demon's side, intending to knock it off balance, to create an opening for her. But his angle was off, and his hesitation to use lethal force made him a fraction of a second too slow. The brute swiped at Elsa with a massive, clawed hand. She dodged back, but the claws caught her jacket, tearing the thick leather and ripping a gash down her arm. She cried out in pain, stumbling backward, her face pale. Rage, pure and protective, surged through Deku. He had failed. His methods, his rules, had resulted in one of his new allies getting hurt. Before the brute could press its advantage, a black streak cut through the air. Blade was there, his face a mask of cold fury. His katana sliced through the demon's thick neck in a single, powerful stroke. The creature's head slid from its shoulders, and its massive body dissolved into a cloud of ash before it even hit the ground. Blade didn't spare a glance for his handiwork. He rounded on Deku, his eyes burning with a cold fire behind his sunglasses. What did I tell you, kid? He snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Your hesitation has a body count. You keep trying to play by hero rules, and you're going to get us all killed. This isn't a game. The reprimand struck Deku harder than any physical blow. He looked at Elsa, who was clutching her bleeding arm, her face tight with pain but her eyes holding not anger, but a grim sort of understanding. He had failed. He had hurt someone he was trying to protect. The sounds of the battle raged around them, but in that moment, Deku's world narrowed to the stinging truth of Blade's words. His way wasn't working. As if to punctuate his failure, a new threat emerged. One of the larger demons, a hulking, bat-winged creature that had been clinging to the ceiling, let out a deafening roar. It was clearly a leader of some kind, its green eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence the others lacked. It pointed a long, clawed finger at the huddle of civilians behind the altar. The flesh is for the mother. It boomed, its voice a chorus of grinding stones. Their fear will be the wine for her feast. It launched itself from the ceiling, diving directly towards the altar. Strange was occupied, holding a shimmering barrier against the swarm of the smaller demons. Blade and Elsa were pinned down near the entrance. It was too far, too fast. Deku's heart plummeted. He couldn't possibly reach them in time. And then, from the shadows near the cathedral's entrance, came the sound of a revving engine and the rattling of a chain. Johnny Blaze stepped into the light, but it was no longer Johnny. His head was wreathed in roaring, ethereal flames, burning away his skin and hair to reveal a bare, bleached white skull. His eyes were empty sockets burning with the fires of hell itself. He had grown larger, his worn leather jacket now seeming like the mantle of some avenging angel. A heavy, iron chain, glowing with orange heat, was wrapped around his arm and torso. This was the Ghost Rider. The winged demon faltered in its dive, its intelligent eyes widening with something that looked like primal fear. The rider! He is here! Guilty, the Ghost Rider growled, his voice a supernatural echo, the sound of 1,000 souls crying out for vengeance. He moved with an unnatural speed, a blur of black leather and hellfire. He swung his chain, and it flew through the air, a whistling arc of burning metal. It wrapped around the winged demon's leg, and with a grunt of effort, the rider yanked the creature from the air. It slammed into the stone floor with a sickening crunch of bone and chitin. The demon scrambled to get up, but the Ghost Rider was already upon it, one heavy boot planted firmly on its chest. The rider leaned down, his flaming skull just inches from the demon's terrified face. Look into my eyes, the rider commanded. The demon struggled, trying to look away, but it was held fast by an unseen force. Its gaze was drawn inexorably towards the rider's burning, empty sockets. "Your soul is stained by the blood of the innocent," the rider intoned, his voice devoid of all mercy. "Feel their pain." And then it began. Deku watched, frozen in place, as a torrent of orange energy poured from the rider's eyes into the demon's. The demon didn't just scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that transcended the physical. It writhed on the floor, its body convulsing as if being electrocuted. Deku didn't just see it, he felt it. A psychic backlash washed over the room, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, his mind brushed against the raw, unfiltered experience of the penance stare. He felt the terror of every life the demon had ever taken, the pain of every soul it had ever tormented, all focused into a single, unbearable point of eternal damnation. It was the antithesis of everything he was. He fought to save souls. This power existed only to burn them. It wasn't justice. It was divine, absolute retribution. The experience lasted only a second for Deku, but it felt like an eternity. He stumbled back, gasping, his own soul recoiling from the sheer, horrifying purity of the punishment he had just witnessed. The winged demon's screams died down. Its body went limp, its glowing green eyes fading to a dull, glassy gray. It had not dissolved into ash. It was just a corpse. A husk, its soul scoured from existence. The Ghost Rider stood up, the flames around his skull dying down slightly. He gave the dead demon a final, contemptuous nudge with his boot. The sheer brutality of it left Deku shaken to his core. This wasn't a team of heroes. This was a pack of executioners. And he was standing right in the middle of them. His moment of horrified reflection was shattered by a scream from the altar. The remaining civilians were trying to make a break for the door, but their path was cut off by the last and largest of the demons. It was a behemoth, easily 10 feet tall, its body a misshapen mass of muscle and chitin, with 4 powerful arms ending in sharpened bone blades. It swatted aside a stone baptismal font as if it were a child's toy, the holy water hissing as it touched its hide. Strange was still maintaining his barrier. Blade and Elsa were fighting back to back, surrounded. Ghost Rider was across the nave. It was up to him. Deku saw the terror on the faces of the people cowering before the behemoth. A mother clutching her child, an old man praying, a teenager staring in wide-eyed shock. In their eyes, he saw the faces of the people he had sworn to protect back home. He saw Uraraka. He saw Ida. He saw his own mother. Strange words echoed in his head. "You can only destroy them." Blade's words. "Your hesitation has a body count." He looked at his hands. For his entire life, they had been the hands of a hero. Hands that saved, that protected, that lifted people up. Now, he was being asked to make them the hands of a killer. The behemoth raised all 4 of its bladed arms, preparing to bring them down on the terrified group. There was no more time. No more options. No other way. A guttural sob of self-loathing and despair escaped Deku's lips. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though no one could hear him. He pushed off the floor, one for all exploding through his body, not at 10%, not at 20%, but at a level he hadn't used since his fight with Muscular. The green lightning around him turned a searing, brilliant white. The air itself crackled with the sheer pressure of his power. The voices of the vestiges roared in his mind, a chorus of encouragement, of necessity, of grim resolve. Delaware smash. 45%. He wasn't aiming to incapacitate. He wasn't aiming to disable. He was aiming for the center of its mass. For oblivion. He flicked his finger, and a cannonball of pure, compressed power, far more concentrated and devastating than any he had used before, shot across the cathedral. It struck the behemoth square in the chest. The result was not an impact. It was an erasure. There was a deafening boom that shattered the remaining stained glass windows. For a split second, the demon's form was silhouetted against a blinding sphere of green-white light. Then, it simply ceased to be. There was no explosion of gore, no body thrown across the room. The creature was utterly, completely obliterated, vaporized into a fine red-black mist that hung in the air for a moment before dissipating. The shockwave from the blast washed over the cathedral, clearing the nave of smoke and ash. And then, silence. The remaining lesser demons, their leader and their champion gone, seemed to falter. They let out a collective, panicked chittering and began to retreat, scrambling back through the broken doors and windows, melting into the shadows of the night. The battle was over. Deku stood in the center of the ruined sanctuary, his arm trembling, smoke wafting from his fingertips. He stared at the empty space where the monster had been, his mind a hollow void. He had done it. He had killed. He had taken a life, even a monstrous one, and ended it with absolute finality. A line had been crossed, a part of his soul forever stained. He slowly, mechanically, lowered his arm. He looked at his own hands, at the very fingers that had unleashed such annihilating force. They didn't look like his own. They looked like weapons, terrible, world-breaking weapons. A wave of nausea and self-disgust so powerful it made him dizzy washed over him. The civilians were safe. His new allies were safe. He had done what was necessary, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a damnation. He felt a heavy hand clap down on his shoulder. The grip was firm, grounding. He looked up to see Blade standing beside him, his katana now sheathed, his face unreadable behind his glasses. The battle was over, and the vampire hunter's cold, predatory focus had receded, replaced by a grim, weary understanding. He didn't offer words of comfort. He didn't say, "You did what you had to do." He didn't say it would get easier. He offered something far more honest, and far more terrifying. He just nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin, and his gravelly voice cut through the ringing in Deku's ears. "Welcome to the war, kid." The silence that followed the battle was worse than the screams. Back in the impossible, labyrinthine halls of the Sanctum Sanctorum, the war felt a universe away, yet for Izuku Midoriya, it was raging behind his eyes. He sat on the edge of the same velvet couch he'd woken up on, his costume clean once more thanks to some unseen, magical force, but he felt irrevocably stained. He could still feel the phantom sensation of 45% of One for All, a power meant to save, to inspire, to be a symbol of peace, unleashing itself as an instrument of total annihilation. He could still see the empty space where the demon had been, the fine mist of its existence scattered by the force of his blow. He had won. He had protected people. And he had never felt more like a monster. The others had left him to his thoughts, a small mercy he was grateful for. Elsa had gotten her arm stitched up by Strange with a thread of glowing gold, muttering something about needing a drink. Blade had simply vanished into the sanctum's shadows, a ghost returning to his haunt. Johnny Blaze had reverted to his human form, the hellfire receding to leave only a man who looked like he carried the weight of 1,000 sins on his shoulders. He'd given Deku a long, unreadable look before wandering off. For hours, Deku sat there, replaying the moment in his head. The decision. The execution. The result. He had crossed the line he'd sworn never to approach. He had killed. Was this what it meant to be a hero in this world? To become a killer to fight killers? To sacrifice a piece of your soul to save the souls of others? The thought was a venomous serpent, coiling in the pit of his stomach. This was the path his vigilante run had been leading him down. The isolation, the desperation, the willingness to push boundaries. He had thought he was on the edge back in Muzurifu. He now realized he hadn't even known where the edge was. He could feel the abyss opening up before him. He could shut down, let the guilt consume him. He could become cold and hard like Blade, a weapon pointed at the dark. Or, he could do the only thing he had ever known how to do when faced with an overwhelming, terrifying problem he didn't understand. He could analyze it. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, he stood up. He walked, almost by instinct, to the grand library where he had first met the team. The air smelled of aged parchment and latent magic. He scanned the shelves, not for a grimoire of ancient spells, but for something far more fundamental. He found it on a forgotten corner of a massive oak desk, a stack of blank, leather-bound journals and a simple, old-fashioned fountain pen. He took one. The leather was cool and smooth beneath his trembling fingers. He sat at the desk, the massive window of the worlds casting a faint, cosmic glow over the page. He uncapped the pen, its nib scratching softly as he wrote the title on the first page, his own neat, meticulous script, a small anchor of familiarity in this sea of madness. Supernatural Analysis for the Future, Volume 1. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He wasn't just writing notes. He was rebuilding himself. He was taking the chaos that had nearly broken him and forcing it into the ordered, logical framework of his mind. If he could understand it, if he could define its rules, then he could find a way to win without losing himself. He would not become a killer. He would become a strategist. A new kind of hero for a new, darker world. He started with the enemy. Entry 1, the Leline, Lesser Variants. Classification, Demonic Infantry. Physiology, varies wildly. Insected, reptilian, and brutish mammalian forms observed. Chitinous exoskeletons seem common. Strength and durability are significantly higher than a baseline human, even those with minor strength-enhancing quirks. The brute variant withstood a 15% kick with minimal damage. Weaknesses: conventional firearms are ineffective unless ammunition is specialized. Elsa's silver rounds? Silver appears to be a key vulnerability. Blade, sword, and stakes were exceptionally effective. Decapitation/destruction of the head seems to be a reliable method of termination. Key hazard: acidic blood. Contact with black whip resulted in rapid corrosion and dissolution of the energy tendrils. Direct physical contact is extremely hazardous. Is this a property of all demons or specific to this type? Need more data. Conclusion: direct capture via black whip is currently not a viable strategy. Standard non-lethal strikes are ineffective. A new approach is required. He paused, flexing his fingers. The act of writing, of breaking down the horror into data points, was working. The panic in his chest was receding, replaced by the familiar hum of intense concentration. He wasn't just a traumatized kid anymore. He was a researcher. His analysis, however, could only go so far with his own limited observations. He needed to understand his allies. They were the established experts, the living textbooks in this new, terrifying field of study. He found Elsa first, in a chamber that looked like a cross between an armory and a workshop. Guns, swords, stakes, and bizarre artifacts he couldn't begin to identify lined the walls. She was meticulously disassembling one of her silver pistols, cleaning each component with a practiced, almost loving, care. Her injured arm was wrapped in a clean white bandage, the golden thread Strange had used now invisible. She looked up as he entered, her eyebrow raised in amusement. "Come to watch a real professional at work, Broccoli Boy." I had some questions," he said, holding up his notebook. "About your equipment." Her smirk widened. "Oh, a fan, are we? Go on then. Ask away." Deku's hesitation vanished, replaced by a torrent of analytical curiosity. "Your pistols. You called them silver rounds, but silver is a soft metal. It would deform on impact and wouldn't have the necessary stopping power, especially against those armored hides. Is the silver blessed? Or is it an alloy? Does it carry a magical charge? And your rifle from before, the one you were polishing? The lens assembly is complex. Is it for targeting spiritual entities that are out of phase with our reality? Does it use a specific light frequency that's disruptive to demonic physiology?" Elsa stared at him, her hands frozen mid-task. Her amused smirk had been replaced by a look of genuine surprise. "Bloody hell," she muttered. "You're not just a fan, you're a full-blown anorak. All right, sit down." She gestured to a stool. "For the next hour," she explained. The bullets were a silver mercury cold iron alloy, each one individually engraved with a microscopic blessing of Saint Michael. The silver wasn't for piercing power. It was a potent metaphysical poison to most supernatural creatures. The rifle was the famous Bloodstone family heirloom, the Wraith Hunter, its crystal lens ground from a shard of a fallen star, allowing her to see and target the spiritual weak points on a creature. Deku scribbled furiously, his pen flying across the page, drawing diagrams, noting chemical compositions, and theorizing applications. As he listened, his mind was already making connections. The energy output of the Wraith Hunter's lens could be amplified, he mumbled, more to himself than to her. If you could create a secondary focusing array using quartz infused with a minor sympathetic enchantment, Dr. Strange could probably provide one. You could narrow the beam of energy. It would reduce the area of effect, but it would increase the penetration power by a factor of 10. You could probably punch a hole clean through a demon the size of that behemoth from the cathedral. He sketched a quick, incredibly detailed diagram of a modified lens housing, complete with notes on power regulation and heat dispersal. He pushed the notebook towards her. Something like this. Elsa picked up the journal, her expression unreadable. She studied the drawing, her expert eye tracing the lines, her lips moving silently as she read his annotations. She was silent for a full minute. Strange has a whole workshop full of enchanted crystals and raw materials, she said slowly, looking from the notebook to him. This could actually work. She looked at him, and the witty, teasing mask was gone. In its place was a look of frank, unadorned respect. You've got a real knack for this, kid. Not just the brawn, but the brains, too. Maybe you're not such a liability after all. She handed the notebook back, a genuine smile on her face. You stick with me, broccoli boy. We'll make a proper monster hunter out of you yet. Leaving Elsa to tinker with his designs, Deku sought out his next subject, Blade. He found him in a cavernous, sparring chamber deep in the sanctum's sublevels. The room was bare stone, empty except for a rack of medieval-looking weapons. Blade was in the center of the room, shirtless, his torso a roadmap of scars. He moved through a complex series of martial arts forms, his silver katana a blur, each movement economical, precise, and utterly lethal. Deku stood by the entrance, notebook in hand, and simply watched. He didn't interrupt. He just observed, his eyes tracking every shift of Blade's weight, every parry, every strike. He wasn't just watching a man fight. He was watching a philosophy of violence in motion. Entry 3 Blade, Eric Brooks. Fighting style, hybrid. A mix of numerous martial arts, optimized for killing. No wasted movement. Every block is a potential strike. Every step is calculated to create a fatal opening. He doesn't fight to win. He fights to end the fight as quickly and permanently as possible. Physiology, Daywalker. Half human, half vampire? He possesses their strengths, speed, power, senses, without their weaknesses save for the thirst. His physical abilities are on par with a mid to high level pro hero, but his combat efficiency is off the charts. He is a predator. Key principle, certainty. He never hesitates. He identifies the threat, identifies the weak point, and strikes. This certainty is his greatest weapon. My own hesitation is my greatest weakness in this context. Can I learn his certainty without adopting his lethality? You going to stand there all day, or are you going to do something? Blade's voice cut through the air, sharp as his sword. He hadn't stopped moving, hadn't even looked in Deku's direction, but he had known he was there the entire time. I'm observing, Deku replied simply. Observing won't keep you alive, Blade retorted, finishing his form with a final, vicious slash that cut the air with a whistle. He turned, pointing the tip of his katana at Deku. Pick up a sword. Deku hesitated. I don't know how. I didn't ask if you knew how. I told you to pick one up, Blade interrupted. You want to learn how we fight? You do it by fighting. Reluctantly, Deku picked up a heavy, wooden training sword from the rack. It felt clumsy and foreign in his hands. Come on, Blade said, beckoning with his free hand. Deku charged, channeling a mere 3% of one for all into his limbs for speed. He swung the wooden sword in a wide, powerful arc. Blade didn't even seem to move. He simply shifted his weight, and the sword sailed past him. Before Deku could recover his balance, the flat of Blade's katana tapped him sharply on the back of the neck. You're dead, Blade said flatly. Again. For the next hour, it was the same story. Deku attacked with speed and power that should have been overwhelming. Blade, with minimal effort, would redirect, disarm, or kill him with a tap of his sword. Deku wasn't trying to win. He was learning. He was feeling the flow of combat, the way Blade anticipated his every move, the way he exploited the smallest opening. You're too honest, Blade grunted, easily sidestepping another attack. You broadcast every move you make. Your power makes you sloppy. You think you can just overwhelm everything. That's not. Deku started to protest, but Blade cut him off. It is. You telegraphed that last kick a full second before you threw it. In a real fight, you'd have a stake in your gut before your leg was halfway extended. He paused, his head cocked. But you're learning. You're adapting. You're not making the same mistake twice. He was right. Deku was cataloging every failed attack, every successful counter, in his head. He was building a mental model of Blade's fighting style, and by extension, the ruthless efficiency required to survive in this world. Finally, sweaty and bruised, Deku lowered his training sword. "Why do you do it?" he asked, the question coming out before he could stop it. "Why this life? Why the killing?" Blade was silent for a long moment, wiping his katana clean. "A vampire killed my mother while she was giving birth to me," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It was a simple statement of fact. Made me what I am. They started this war with me before I ever took my first breath." He sheathed his sword. "I'm just finishing it. One leech at a time." He walked past Deku towards the exit. "This isn't about heroism, kid," he said without looking back. "It's about vengeance. Don't ever forget that." Deku was left alone in the sparring room, the weight of Blade's cold, hard world settling on his shoulders. He added a final line to Blade's entry: motivation, vengeance. Can a hero be motivated by vengeance? Or does that make them something else? He needed a different perspective. A less absolute one. He found Dr. Strange in his study, meditating. He floated a few feet off the floor, the eye of Agamotto on his chest glowing with a soft, golden light. Deku waited patiently, notebook at the ready. When Strange finally opened his eyes, he did not seem surprised to see him. "You have questions," he stated. "So many," Deku admitted. "Magic. It defies the laws of physics as I understand them." "It does not defy them," Strange corrected gently. "It simply operates on a set of laws your science has yet to recognize. Think of it as the universe's source code. A sorcerer is someone who has learned to read and edit that code." Deku's eyes lit up. "So it's a programmable reality? Are there limits? A syntax? Does it require a power source, an external energy drawn from other dimensions, or is it powered by the user's own life force?" Strange smiled, a genuine, academic smile. "All of the above. And you, Mr. Midoriya, ask all the right questions." He explained the basics: the drawing of power from other dimensions, the use of spells as focused applications of will, the delicate balance of cost and effect. Deku absorbed it all, his mind racing. "So one for all, you said it's a beacon of hope. In your terms, what is it? Is it generating a specific frequency of positive energy that's disruptive to demonic entities?" "An excellent way to put it," Strange affirmed. "It is a self-sustaining font of what we might call order magic, a raw, untamed force of positive creation. Lilith is a creature of chaos magic. They are fundamental opposites. Your very presence is painful to them." This was it. This was the key. He wasn't just a blunt instrument. His power had a specific property. But a new, worrying thought occurred to him. "What about things that can't be punched?" he asked. "Incorporeal threats. Ghosts. Psychic attacks." He felt a stir in the back of his mind. A whisper from the vestiges. He closed his eyes, focusing inward. For the first time, he wasn't just feeling their presence. He was actively consulting them. He found himself in the familiar, dreamlike space where the previous users of One for All resided. They gathered around him, their forms shimmering like heat haze. "They are right to be concerned." 9th, Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user, said, his voice a gentle echo. "We were a power meant for the physical world," Daigoro Banjo added, his arms crossed. "To fight a tyrant of flesh and blood." Deku looked at Nana Shimura, All Might's mentor. Her kind, strong face was etched with concern. "Can we fight them?" he asked her, his voice pleading. "Can we fight souls?" Nana placed a comforting, ethereal hand on his shoulder. The touch was warm, like a fond memory. "This power is more than just strength, Izuku," she said, her voice filled with a hope that cut through his fear. "It's the collected will of all of us. Will is a force that can touch the soul. We are not just your power. We are your shield. When the time comes, don't just punch with us. Punch through us. Let our light be your weapon." The answer was cryptic, but it was enough. He opened his eyes, a newfound resolve solidifying in his chest. He had an answer. A path forward. There was only one member of the team left to understand. The most enigmatic. The most terrifying. He found Johnny Blaze in a quiet observatory at the top of the sanctum, staring out at the alien sky visible through the window of the worlds. He wasn't looking at the cosmic whales or dying stars, but at the infinite, empty blackness between them. They talk to you, don't they? Johnny said without turning, his voice a low rasp. The ghosts in your head. The vestiges, Deku corrected softly. They're not ghosts. They're a part of me. Johnny let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Yeah. That's what I tell myself about him, too. He finally turned, and his eyes were pits of weary despair. What do you want, kid? Come to study the freak show up close? Deku held up his notebook. I want to understand. The penance stare. The hellfire. It's a power unlike any other I've seen. It doesn't seem to destroy the body. It destroys the soul. Johnny flinched, the question clearly hitting a raw nerve. No one had ever asked him to deconstruct his own damnation before. It's not my power, he said, his voice tight. It's his. The writer's. He's a spirit of vengeance. An angel of justice who made a deal with the wrong devil. He gestured vaguely at his own chest. I'm just the cage he lives in. Deku took a step closer, his gaze not fearful, but intensely, genuinely curious. But what is hellfire? Is it fueled by your anger? By sin? When you use the penance stare, are you the judge? Or just the weapon? Does it have a temperature? Can it burn something without a soul? The questions came out in a rush, a stream of pure, unfiltered inquiry. Johnny just stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. For years, people had only reacted to the ghost rider with fear or awe. No one had ever asked for the technical specifications of his curse. It's the fire of sin itself, Johnny said slowly, as if discovering the words for the first time. It burns what's guilty. The more sin on a soul, the hotter it burns. The penance stare, it doesn't show them what they did. It makes them feel it. All of it. All at once. He shuddered, a full-body tremor. And yeah, I feel it too. Every single time. He looked at Deku, at his earnest, analytical expression, and something in his haunted gaze shifted. You're not scared of it, he stated, a note of disbelief in his voice. It's terrifying, Deku admitted honestly. But it's a part of this world. And if I'm going to fight here, I need to understand it. All of it. A fragile, unprecedented bond was forged in that moment. A mutual respect between the boy who carried the souls of heroes and the man who was caged with a demon. The next day, his opportunity came. Strange gathered them in the library, the magical map glowing on the table. A single, pulsing red light appeared over a desolate area of the New Jersey Pine Barrens. We have a problem, Strange announced. A soul flayer. A high-ranking alien that feeds on psychic energy. It's fast, semi-incorporeal, and it creates a field of terror that can incapacitate even seasoned sorcerers. A direct assault is suicide, Blade crossed his arms. So we wait for it to pick a target and ambush it. The last time we tried that, we lost 2 masters from the London Sanctum, Strange countered grimly. It senses direct aggression. It will know we are coming. They stood in silence, the problem hanging in the air. This was it. This was his chance. I have a plan, Deku said, his voice quiet but firm. All eyes turned to him. Blade looked skeptical. Elsa looked intrigued. Your power makes you a beacon, Strange reminded him. It will be drawn to you. That's the point, Deku said, stepping forward and opening his notebook. It's not just a beacon. It's bait. He laid out his plan, his voice gaining confidence with every word. It wasn't a simple brawl. It was a symphony of coordinated destruction, built on everything he had learned. The soul flayer is drawn to strong emotional energy. My power is the strongest, but it also registers as a threat. So I won't use it. I'll suppress it completely. He looked at the team. Instead, I will be the victim. I'll project fear and despair. I'll be the perfect meal. It won't be able to resist. It'll tear you to shreds before we can get there, Blade said flatly. Not if you're already in position, Deku countered, pointing at his notes. Blade, you'll be here. He drew a point on a hastily sketched map. Its incorporeal state flickers when it attacks. My analysis of its reported movement patterns shows a consistent blind spot on its left flank when it materializes. You'll have exactly 0.8 seconds to strike. Your certainty is the key. He looked at Elsa. Elsa, you'll be 300 meters away, on high ground. You won't be able to see it, but the new focusing lens on the Wraith Hunter should allow you to see its spiritual energy signature. It has a psychic antenna that it uses to project its fear field. It's a small target, but your shot will disrupt its primary weapon, causing feedback that will stun it and force it fully into the physical world. He turned to the last two. Johnny. When it's stunned, it will attempt to flee back to its own dimension. It will become ethereal again. You're the only one who can intercept it on that plane. You're not the primary attack, you're the net. And what of me, Mr. Midoriya? Strange asked, a flicker of approval in his eyes. You, Deku said, are containment. The moment it's destroyed, it will release a massive psychic death cry. A wave of pure terror. Your job is to be ready to shield us from that backlash. You're not fighting the demon, you're fighting its dying scream. The room was silent. Deku had not just given them a plan. He had given each of them a precise role that played perfectly to their unique strengths. Strengths he had spent the last 2 days meticulously studying. He had turned them from a group of cynical individuals into a coordinated special ops team. The plan worked perfectly. In the heart of the dark, twisted forest, Deku stood alone, projecting an aura of pure terror, a skill he unfortunately had plenty of recent experience with. The Soul Flayer, a creature of shadow and screaming faces, materialized behind him, its claws reaching for his soul. Elsa's shot, fired from an impossible distance, struck true. The creature shrieked, its fear field collapsing as it was forced into solid form. In that 0.8-second window, Blade lunged from the shadows, his katana a silver blur that severed the creature's head from its shoulders. As its body began to discorporate, it tried to flee, its form becoming smoke. A burning chain lashed out from the trees, ensnaring the smoky essence and dragging it back. The Ghost Rider's penance stare ensured its soul knew eternal damnation before it was extinguished, and as the final psychic scream erupted from the dissipating remains, a shimmering golden shield bloomed around the team, Strange absorbing the full force of the death cry without flinching. It was over in less than 5 seconds. A perfect, flawless execution. They regrouped in the silent woods. Elsa gave Deku a solid, approving punch on the shoulder. Blade looked at him, and for the first time, gave a slow, single nod of pure, unadulterated respect. The silent gesture spoke volumes more than words ever could. Doctor Strange approached him, the golden shield fading around them. He looked at Deku, then at the open notebook still clutched in his hand. He may have the heart of a hero, Strange said to the others, but his words were meant for Deku. But he has the mind of a strategist. He gave a small, rare smile. Perhaps there's a place for his methods after all.